As this community, I want you to know that you are not alone. Know that kindred spirits across the globe move towards life's largest questions and deepest challenges, aspiring to a perpetual openness that many people find uncomfortable or even frightening, trying to stay open all the time.
Good morning. I'll say my good morning also. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of the mountains. I'm Cheryl Morris, serving as your worship associate this morning. This service is the first in a series Reverend Kevin has planned, and it will continue throughout the year. The goal is to deepen our understanding of ourselves, enhancing our personal growth and satisfaction in our relationships and our lives. The series is an outgrowth of his own work with the Enneagram during his renewal leave. It's one more way we directly benefit from the time he spent in personal study and reflection. When I first signed on for this service, I felt apprehensive because I know so little about the Enneagram, and I know there's others in this room who have studied and worked with it for years. Once Kevin explained that I really didn't need to know anything about it. That's always something you want to hear, right? He said it's simply a tool, and then I could relax and look forward to learning something new. So I encourage you to approach it in this spirit, whether it's brand new to you or if you're familiar with it and looking at it with fresh eyes. I suspect we will be learning some new terminology and perhaps beginning to think of ourselves in terms of a number. Am I a 1, a 5, a 9? Kevin will explain this further, but I expect he'll tell us it's important not to get too hung up on this, and that the numbers are meaningful only to the extent they help us understand our motivations and our fears, which then lead to our emotional responses and reactions. At UUCM, we strive to be an inclusive congregation, welcoming all, whatever your race, ethnicity, gender identification, financial status, spiritual beliefs, or absence of them. And now, maybe we'll add, whatever your number. You are so welcome here.
You do that so nicely, Cheryl. So I told the story of the acorn and the tree earlier. I had scheduled it for this service months ago. And then when we were planning a service on transformation, it just kept feeling like the right story. So we offered it then. And I'm going to offer it again because some things bear repeating. This is based on a way that Cynthia Borgelt told this story. I learned it from Beatrice Chestnut, teacher and advocate of the Enneagram, and she teaches it as a resource for our personal journeys. So once upon a time, which means it could be any time, even now, in a not so far away land, there was a wonderful community of acorns, nestled at the foot of a grand old oak tree. Since the members of this community were contemporary, conscientious, fully westernized acorns, they went about their business and their lives with purposeful energy, and since they were baby boomer acorns, they engaged in a lot of self-help courses. There were seminars called Getting All You Can Out of Your Shell. There were powerful woundedness and recovery groups for acorns who had been bruised in their original fall from the tree. The members of the community assembled shell repair kits to give out at the local open-air market on Saturday mornings. There were spas for oiling and polishing those shells, and lessons for young acorns on how to adjust their caps and how to reattach their caps, because they do tend to come off at some point. And there were many and various acornopathic therapies to enhance acorn longevity and well-being. Well, one day, in the midst of this very active community, there suddenly appeared a naughty little stranger, apparently dropped out of the blue by a passing bird. His acorn was capless and rather smudged and dirty, making an immediate negative impression on their fellow acorns. And then, crouched beneath this spreading oak tree, this newly arrived and unfamiliar and rather unkempt acorn stammered out a wild tale. Pointing upward at the grand and sheltering tree, the acorn said, "We are that." Delusional thinking, obviously, the other acorns concluded. But one of them was curious enough to engage this new acorn in a little more conversation. So tell us, how would we become that tree? Well, the acorn said, scratching its face and then pointing downward, I'm not entirely sure, but it has something to do with going into the ground and cracking open the shell. Insane, the other acorns responded. Totally morbid, gruesome. And then, wait, if we did that, we wouldn't be acorns anymore. And so ends, or rather, so begins the tale. Drawing on the words of my now retired colleague, Victoria Safford, imagine this. On the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, every fall, every year, the people make their peace with anyone they have wronged or slighted or injured or in any way neglected in the past 12 months. The task is not to patch things up, smooth things over, reach a compromise, or sweep mistakes and uneasy memories under the rug. The task is not to feel better, even. The task is ownership. The goal is truth for its own redemptive sake. I did this. I said this to you, and it was wrong. I neglected this. I botched this. I betrayed you thusly. I demeaned you whether you ever knew it or not. This is the truth in which both of us are living. I ask you to forgive me. Imagine how many deep breaths you would need to take. Imagine how many doors you'd have to knock on, how many phone calls you'd have to make, how many letters, how many lunches and coffees, how many awkward moments with your children and your parents and with strangers. Awkward is irrelevant. The task is not about comfort or about perfection, I would add. It's about truth, about wholeness and holiness, about restoration. Imagine something in us yearns to come round right. Something creaky, rusty, heavy, almost calcified within us tries, in spite of us and all of our fears and self-deceptions, to turn and turn and creak and turn again and come round a little truer. Something in us stretches toward conversion. Imagine healing wholly, completely from within. Imagine healing wholly, completely from within. There are messages that each of us needs to hear when we are very, very young. And just so you know, almost no one, maybe no one, hears all of these messages completely. As I speak one possible list, I invite you to listen with your heart and your body. Let the words enter, and with kindness and with compassion toward yourself, notice which of these messages calls up some kind of response in you. Whether that response is nothing, or longing, or appreciation, or sadness, or ease, or anger, or hope, or fear, or a sudden stillness or blankness. That's usually one of my cues. sudden stillness. So listen and notice. Take these in. You are good. You are good. You are wanted. You are wanted. You are loved for who you are. You are loved for who you are. You are seen for who you are. You are seen for who you are. Your needs are not a problem. Your needs are not a problem. You are safe. You are safe. You will be taken care of. You will be taken care of. You will not be betrayed. You will not be betrayed. Your presence matters. Your presence matters. Any of those grab differently than the others, I wonder? Both religious wisdom and psychological insight try to remind us that we begin life with these needs and expectations all in place. At the very beginning, we begin whole, with an oak tree ready inside our acorn nature. Spiritual traditions claim that this remains our truth, even though we forget it, that this remains the reality underneath it all. But the nature of being human means that our caregivers, our parents, our communities, the cultures that are poised to communicate and reinforce those messages in many different ways, they could not possibly meet all of our needs completely, could not possibly deliver all of those messages or those realities all of the time. There are times when we were hungry and not fed as soon as we wanted, alone and crying and not greeted or not held as soon as we wanted or needed. Times when our way of engaging the world was so different from that of the person caring for us that they could not see or allow it in us. Times when we did not feel safe, did not feel wanted, did not feel seen and accepted for who we are. It's inevitable to varying degrees, right? This is the human experience. And at some point, we get those messages. So that we start out whole, along the way, we're likely to take in a number of other messages. It's not okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to have your own needs. It's not okay to have your own feelings and identity. It's not okay to be too functional or too happy. It's not okay to be comfortable in the world. It's not okay to trust yourself. It's not okay to depend on anyone for anything. It's not okay to be vulnerable or to trust anyone. It's not okay to assert yourself. And so our sense of ourselves, our behaviors, our way of being in and moving through the world are gradually shaped. We are shaped because when we're very young, we are completely dependent on our caregivers. We have no choice but to do what we have to do to stay alive and to keep those most important internal parts of ourselves alive too, even if that means burying some parts of us for now because it's too painful to remember that they're there and not have those needs met. Over time, we forget how we started out. We forget that our true nature is more expansive and more whole. We come to mistake the shape we've molded ourselves into for who we really are. We think that shape is us. In other words, we fall asleep to our most real selves, our truest, most authentic, most whole selves. In spiritual language, we fall asleep to our true, some say, divine essence. This is one way to look at things anyway. I'm drawing here on the lens of the Enneagram, some of you will know, a psychological and spiritual tool for first observing ourselves, and then understanding ourselves, and then waking up to who we truly are, and then for living into who we are again, for returning again and again to gradually reclaim that homeland of our soul. Which is to say, this is all about coming home. It's about self-acceptance rather than about becoming somebody else, somebody new, somebody different. It's about coming home to who you are. So I've been working with the Enneagram for about 16 years, and as Cheryl mentioned, I dug into some study of it during sabbatical renewal, and I'm going to continue that formal study this fall, in part for my own sake, of course, but also so that I can be of greater service to you in your journeys and the congregation as a whole in its journey. Now, I know a number of you, as Cheryl mentioned, have been digging into the Enneagram for a long time, much longer than I and more deeply than I, and that you are also important resources and guides. I'm just curious, who feels like they have at least a decent sense of the Enneagram? Who's been working with it? Yes, right? So it's not new territory. You have resources around you. There is a lot to the Enneagram, an increasing amount, actually. People keep working with it, right? And calling up more from it. And today in the next Sunday's service, and then as Cheryl mentioned throughout the year, I'm going to share aspects of it or look through the lens of the Enneagram. And I'll tell you later a little bit more about why that feels important to me. But for a moment, let's get a little more into the what to get us anchored. So an Enneagram is by definition a 9-pointed figure. Here's this particular Enneagram, the Enneagram I'm talking about. It's a symbol seen here. It's an amalgam of ancient wisdom traditions as the work with the Enneagram has played out. The symbol itself and some possible esoteric and spiritual psychological meanings to it were first lifted up in modern times by Georg Gurdjieff in Russia and in Europe in the early 1900s. In the 1950s, Oscar Ichazo in Chile started linking Gurdjieff's Enneagram to personality types. And then in 1970, psychiatrist Claudio Naranjo, who was developing a program of Gestalt therapy at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, he studied with Ichazo in Chile and then began teaching the Enneagram in private groups in Berkeley, from where it has since spread mightily. There's some folks associated with the congregation who know folks were in some of those original groups with Naranjo. And I'm drawing in particular today, I draw from many sources, but in particular today on the insights of Beatrice Chestnut and Don Richard Riso and Russ Hudson. As an entry point, you can think of the Enneagram as profiling 9 deep aspects of ourselves, framed as 9 personality types. 9 ways we forget some piece of who we are and put a substitute self in place. 9 ways we try to meet a particular important deep need through a substitute for what we really want. A substitute that actually then prevents us from getting what we're truly after. Thanks, Cypress. For example, 9. 9 is the strongest driving aspect of my personality. 9 is labeled the peacemaker. Who wants things to be calm and smooth, because we want things calm and smooth. The deep 9 need that I have is really to feel powerfully and meaningfully connected to people, which is in fact, that's our natural state. We're inherently connected, right? But I want to feel that, to know that. But early in life, I took on the message that connection can be cut off or withdrawn, that it's not okay to assert myself to get my own needs met, because my needs were sometimes at odds with others' needs, which made for tension and refusal and a withdrawal of the evidence that we were connected. So I learned to experience and understand disagreement as disconnection. So the coping skill I developed in order to preserve a sense of connection, because that's what was important to me, was not to recognize my own needs and instead to tune into other people's needs and desires. No conflict there, right? If I just blend in with somebody else's expectations and somebody else's wants, smooth sailing, I can sort of feel connected. It gave me a pseudo sense of connection. It's warm and easy and smooth, and it feels in sync, but it's a thin and surface connection, a substitute connection, because the real me is not the one who is actually connecting in that case. It's an artificial me, a substitute me, a modified me that's doing the connecting. It's the me I learned to rely on to navigate the world, to try to ensure that I was going to have a sense of connection that would not be withdrawn or cut off, right? It's my attempt to control that. But that very tactic of trying to be connected by blending into somebody else actually gets in the way of the true connection I was seeking. True connection comes when the real me is willing to know and to seek what I want, and it meets another real person willing to know and seek what they want. In other words, in pursuing a substitute for the real connection I actually wanted, it prevented me from the real connection I was trying to get, right? So the substitute actually gets in the way of getting what we want. And every one of the 9 types has a self-sabotaging dilemma like this. We're going for what we want. We settle for a substitute that actually prevents us from getting it. The 9 personality is the type that identifies with all the other types. 9s identify with all the types except for 9. You can see why we do, right? We're trying to figure out how to blend in with everybody, and we don't see who we are in the process. We learn about everybody else but ourselves. And it has been so helpful for me to realize this, right? That I'm actually driven by the desire for connection, but that some of my ways of trying to get it get in the way. So next Sunday, I'm going to walk us through each of those 9 types and start the conversation then about how do you find yours. But today I would prep us for that by noting the circle again, this image of the Enneagram. There's a triangle and there is another multi-sided figure, but there's a circle that connects all of them that I would note, which is a reminder that we have all 9 aspects within us. As Lindsay pointed out last week, no identity is singular. However, the Enneagram teaching is that one of those 9 tends to be our go-to, tends to be the dominant personal way we understand and present ourselves to the world, tends to drive our unconscious automatic behavior. Often we don't even realize it. One deep unmet need, the loss of one of those 9 messages I started with, becomes a primary focus for us because we weren't getting it. As Hudson and Riso put it, we each become an expert at one particular form of coping, and then we mistake our way of coping for who we really are. We mistake our way of coping, our personality, in other words, for who we really are. So here's the pie chart of my 9 types. The 9 and the 5 are almost as strong, those biggest pie pieces. They're 1 degree different. For about 14 years, I thought it was a 5, right? Because 9s don't recognize who we are. But what matters is what drives us. What drives me is the connection, and what matters is what I do to get it. So I have, you can see, kind of 4 pretty strong ones and 4 much less developed ones, which means I have some great gifts and some big gaps. Thanks, Cypress. People often worry about personality typing systems like this, putting them in a box. Like, don't put me in a box. I would name that 2 things about the Enneagram I appreciate in this regard. First, you are the one to know your type, ultimately. No test, nobody else. You're the one to know your type. Now, others might have some really good insight for you, and a test might get you in the ballpark, but you've got to try it out. You're the one to know in the end. And second, the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It recognizes that you're already in a box that you put yourself in. Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It helps you recognize that you're already in a box that you put yourself in. The goal of the Enneagram is to help you see that you learned to put yourself in a box, and then to help you discover ways to get out of it when you want. The goal is not to get rid of the boxes, meaning our personality. We couldn't if we wanted. We need our personalities to navigate the world. The goal is to become aware of what's going on, to see it so that it becomes more transparent, more flexible, more useful, rather than being driven by it without our knowing, rather than it being unconscious, as if we had no choice. The goal is to wake up to who we really are. Now, I'm drawn to the Enneagram as a resource for us, in part because I find its insights so personally and profoundly helpful, of course, and also because it doesn't just leave us with some sense of who we are, some sense of identity, our primary type. It offers then tools and maps for each type for returning to who we are beneath all those restrictions that we've taken on from those messages, all the things we've come to live by without knowing it. It's a tool for helping us unfold some of our protective behaviors and our traits and finding our less crumpled selves. I'm drawn to the Enneagram for Unitarian Universalism because you can approach it as a deep spiritual insight and practice resource, and you can approach it as a source of deep psychological insight and practice. So it bridges the pluralism in our congregations. And it's not a substitute for our other spiritual practices and identities. It's a companion to them. You can draw on it to help us draw on our other practices. I'm drawn to the Enneagram because it doesn't expect that we're all the same. Even within any one of those types, there are all kinds of variations and subtleties. It's about self-discovery, it's about self-understanding, it's about self-agency, it's about having choices. Plus, there's one more important reason I'm drawn to the Enneagram. As I've been looking out into the world at all the mountains of challenges we face, challenges made so much more difficult by the sense of divide and the othering, I realized that one of the largest obstacles to movement is that we are approaching our challenges and each other so often through those ways we learn to cope, from inside our boxes, rather than through our more authentic selves. I think if we're to make a helpful difference in our world, it will help us to keep finding our way beneath all that's automatic and unconscious and unexamined, those reactions and behaviors driven by those lost messages, those forgotten messages. We'll need to act from a deep, authentic place if we want to build the beloved community where all souls are welcomed as blessings, and the human family lives whole and reconciled, as the UUA's Leadership Council put it in 2008. I think the Enneagram is one helpful and accessible tool. Whatever our spiritual, emotional practice and path, Riso and Hudson point out that we will naturally resist opening to that which is most real in us. But if we can open, the result, instead of all those substitutes we settle for, is real integrity, real love, real authenticity, real creativity, real understanding, real guidance, real joy, real power, and real serenity, the things we actually really want. In truth, the things we already really have underneath it all the things we already really are. We are that. To the one in you who believes that it's not okay to make mistakes, you are inherently good as you are. To the two in you who believes that it's not okay to have your own needs, you are very much wanted without needing to earn it. To the three in you who believes that it's not okay to have your own feelings and identity, you are already loved for exactly who you are, not what you do. To the 4 in you, who believes that it's not okay to be too functional or too happy, that something in you is missing or lacking, you are already whole. You are seen for the fullness of who you are. To the 5 in you, who believes that it's not okay to be comfortable in a world that demands too much of you, your needs are not a problem. There's plenty. There is enough. To the 6 in you, who believes that it's not okay to trust yourself, at the deepest levels, you are safe. To the 7 in you, who believes that it's not okay to depend on anyone for anything, that the pain of looking within will be too much, you will be taken care of. To the 8 in you, who believes that it's not okay to be vulnerable or to trust anyone, you will not be betrayed by everyone. To the 9 in you, who believes that it's not okay to assert yourself, your presence matters. You matter. So may we know ourselves to be. So may we know it to be. Blessed be. Ashe. And amen. Transformational teacher Maria Irving writes that the awakening process is not so much about finding who you are, but more about finding about who you are not. More than 200 years earlier, 2,000 years earlier, the ancient Greek poet advised, learn what you are and be such. Sounds so simple. Oh, if only. No matter what messages we have internalized in our life, may we discover more of who we are not, and therefore who we are, and then learn to be exactly such. Then we'll see you next Sunday for our next Enneagram service.